This is Dr. Clayton. Welcome back to Hypnosis Chat. Today I'm going to talk about something that is possibly the most highly requested topic that I've gotten, and that is weight loss. Most people think that weight loss is difficult because they go about it completely the wrong way mentally. As I've spoken about a number of times before, this is largely because our society is not geared around helping the individual to make effective mental change. So we don't really know how to do that. Certainly we don't educate our citizens or students in how to effectively change yourself. Every way of trying to lose weight that is commonly known is based on either restricting yourself from doing something that you want to do or forcing yourself to do something that you don't want to do. The problem with that is that you will never do forever something that you don't want to do. If there's something that requires effort or willpower, you are not going to do it forever. You're not going to do it for the rest of your life. You're going to do it for, if at all, you're going to do it for a little while. And based on a number of different factors, those factors will determine how long you do it and when you stop. So if you are trying to lose weight by restricting yourself from doing something that you want to do or forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do, you are eventually going to fail. And that is natural. It's not a failure on your part. That's just the nature of how the brain works. So one of the things we've talked about many times in the past is how you think determines how you feel. So if you think about food or exercise in a certain way, then it's going to make you feel a certain way. So let me start at the beginning. There are essentially four aspects to weight loss. There is the first one is, it starts with the eating process. The first thing that happens in the eating process is you think about eating. And you are either thinking about eating because you are hungry, or you're thinking about eating for any other reason. Now, as it turns out, those other reasons have to do with centering your brain and making your brain feel comfortable. Your brain can only be uncomfortable in two ways. It can be overactive or underactive. I just dub those bored or stressed. If your brain is underactive, depressed, lonely, bored, I just call that bored. If you are angry, afraid, upset, I just call that stressed. So your brain is either comfortable or it's stressed or it's bored. So now if your brain is stressed or bored, then it is the job of your unconscious to try to correct that. And your unconscious basically doesn't make decisions. It does whatever you've done in the past, whatever you've chosen to do in the past. So your unconscious mind's job is essentially to automate behaviors that you've chosen to do. So if at any point you've chosen, whether it's because your parents told you to or for any other reason, if you've chosen to use food to alleviate stress or boredom, then your unconscious mind can and often does automate that behavior in the future. So now here's the problem. Food does not solve either stress or boredom. At the very most, it can distract you from the stress or boredom for a short time while you're actually eating, and then the stress or boredom just immediately comes back. Food does nothing to solve those two problems. And you can imagine if you went to a physician with a complaint and the physician gave you a piece of cake and then sent you his bill. That would be absurd. That would be ridiculous. But that's what you do to yourself every single time you eat instead of directly taking care of your needs. So the theme for this lesson is you deserve to have your needs met correctly, not just to have food thrown at it. So in order to do that, you have to identify what your need actually is. So the problem is that most people, when they have a need, like stress or boredom, they just allow their unconscious to give them whatever automatic behavior they've done in the past. And then they don't even think about it until after the behavior is done. And by then, of course, it's too late. So what that means is you have to have an extra step in there, an extra step after noticing that you have stress or boredom, And so here's how we're going to do this. This is the easiest way to do it. I've done this with probably about 6,000 to 7,000 people over the last 18 years. The first thing you have to do related to weight loss is you have to, when you think about eating, you have to have an extra step in there where you turn inward and ask yourself, am I physically hungry? Is my stomach actually hungry? You have to become aware of whether you're actually hungry or not. And a lot of interesting things happen at that point. Number one, if you are not actually hungry, often the desire to eat goes away. Also, and more importantly, you can identify what the actual need is. It's not difficult to notice whether you're stressed or bored if you take the 1 second it takes to notice. So if you actually stop and say, well, am I hungry? Is that why I'm thinking about food? And, oh wait, no, I'm not. I'm actually stressed. So there's a couple things to notice there. Number one, food is not going to alleviate the stress. At the very most, it's going to distract you from the stress until you're done eating, and that's it. And that's the most it will do. Often it doesn't even do that. So food does not do anything to alleviate the stress or the boredom. So that's number one. So if you eat when you're stressed, you are doing nothing other than putting fat on your body and distracting yourself from the stress for a few minutes, and that's it. So that's not a good solution. You deserve to have your needs met correctly. So if you discuss, okay, so let's say you did that. You think about eating and you stop and you say, okay, am I physically hungry? You turn inward, check your stomach, and notice that you're not hungry. So what do? Okay, well, is it stress or boredom? Let's just say it's stress. Stress and boredom are, in its simplest form, stress is a part of your brain that is working too much and needs a break. And boredom is there's a part of your brain that requires stimulation. So now there's an interesting fact. Everyone knows that if you spin around physically, you get dizzy. But did you know that if you spin once in the opposite direction, it actually undizzies you? I find that most people don't know that. Try it in a safe environment. Just try it once, just to have that experience. And the lesson to be learned there is that when you do exactly what you need, you don't need that much of it to solve a problem. So, for example, food doesn't really solve a problem, so you can just eat and eat and eat, and it doesn't solve the stress. And I think a lot of people watching this can relate to that. If you're bored, you can eat and eat and eat, and it doesn't solve the boredom. And I think a lot of people watching this can relate to that. But if you're stressed and you do a very different activity, like let's say you switch from a mental activity to a physical activity, like just a very different activity, you will find that the stress becomes alleviated much more efficiently. If you are bored and you switch to a different type of activity, like from a mental to a physical activity, you will find the boredom becomes alleviated much more quickly. So the theme for what we've talked about so far is you deserve to have your needs met correctly, and the only way to do that is to notice what those needs actually are. You are the only one that can notice what your needs actually are on a day-to-day basis. So that's the first step. You will notice, now let's look at that step from another direction. Let's just say there's someone, and there may be many people listening to this right now who can relate to this also. If you don't notice how your stomach feels, if you just have that familiar thought that you think about eating, like where you think, oh, well, maybe I want to eat now, and then you just eat, you can notice how you would never notice whether you're actually hungry or not, and you would just eat way more than you would need. It makes perfect sense that you would eat way more than you need if you skip that step. So step one is to include that extra little step after you think about eating. If you think about eating, there should be a little flag that comes up that says, okay, am I physically hungry? Am I actually hungry now? And by the way, one of the things we'll talk about at some point is how does hypnosis fit into this? And hypnosis is perfect for fitting in little flags like that. For now, I'm just going to give you the what. The hypnosis is essentially about how. I think you will find that this way of thinking is very helpful, and that if you wanted to take it further, that hypnosis can magnify that process. Okay, so the first step is noticing whether or not you're actually hungry. And then if you're not hungry, meeting those needs. So what if you are hungry? So the second step is once you've decided you are hungry, the second step is selecting what food you're going to have. So this is another really interesting topic. If you interview people who are overweight versus people who are not overweight, you ask them, what is your favorite food, or what kind of food do you like, or what kind of food do you want? They'll give you very different answers. People who are overweight will almost always give you a food that tastes good to them. And a lot of people listening now might say, well, of course, if you say what kind of food do you want, of course you would say what kind of food tastes good. But believe it or not, people who are naturally slender, who have no problem controlling their weight and don't know why you're fat, those people don't even think they don't even think about what the food tastes like when you ask them what kind of food they want. There's kind of an interesting story about that, where I realized that probably about 20 years ago or so, and I had a friend who was just very naturally slender, and had nothing to do with metabolism or anything like that. It just had to do with how she thought about food, and she had no idea how she thought about food. It never even crossed her mind. That's just how she thought about it. And I remember somebody asking, would you like to go to this fast food restaurant, whatever it was? And it was obviously not a healthy choice. And she thought about it, and she held her stomach and said, oh, that wouldn't taste very good. And it was super obvious to me that she was not thinking about the taste at all. She was thinking about how that food would feel in her stomach. But she didn't realize that. She thought she was thinking about the taste of the food. And it was just fascinating to me. So you'll notice, and if you ask people who just have no problem managing their weight, they will, and you interview them, you'll find that they tend to think about what a food would make them feel like, not what a food would taste like. Another way to think about that is when you plan a road trip, you don't plan it based on the scenery, you plan it based on the most efficient way to get there. Scenery is something that you enjoy while you're driving. Likewise, people who are naturally slender, they tend to enjoy the taste of a food just as much as everyone else does, but they enjoy it while they're eating. They don't plan their food based on what tastes good. That's kind of maybe the key point. So what does this mean? What is the next step? So you've decided you're hungry, you're selecting your food, and here's the difference. So what everyone does, every single person, when I say a food, or when they think of a food, the first thing they think of is what it looks like. If I say spaghetti, you have to see what it looks like first to identify what I'm talking about. So everyone thinks of it visually first. Then people who are overweight will tend to imagine what that food tastes like in their mouth. So they'll imagine what it looks like, then they'll imagine it in their mouth. And you can notice if you do that now, then your brain's like, oh, okay, if you want to make a decision based on what it tastes like, that's fine, I can do that. And it creates motivation based on what it tastes like. On the other hand, people who are naturally slender will tend to they'll think of the picture, and then they'll think of what the food feels like in their stomach. And your brain's fine with that too. Your brain doesn't care. Your brain just wants to do what you want to do. So if you think of it that way, your brain will make motivation based on how it feels in your stomach. For example, think of a food that tastes good but doesn't make you feel good. And if you're not sure how to do this, or if you don't think you could do this, like an obvious example would be like if you ate like an entire pizza, or if you had 5 cinnamon buns or something like that. Just to use an extreme case. It actually doesn't just work in extreme cases, but just to make it super easy, you can use an extreme case. So let's just say there's 5 cinnamon buns. And here's what I want you to do. You see what they look like already. Now don't imagine them in your mouth. Just skip that for a second. You see the cinnamon buns, and I want you to just open up a door in your stomach and just shove them in. Okay? And then close the door. Now you can feel those 5 cinnamon buns in your stomach right now. How appealing does that seem? Not very appealing. Nobody thinks that feels, or that doesn't seem appealing to anyone. Now, and that is how someone who's naturally slender would think of having that kind of food. On the other hand, by contrast, imagine, okay, so clear your mind of all that, get rid of all that. Okay, now imagine you're hungry. Now imagine a small, balanced meal that is healthy and good for you. Now, imagine you see what it looks like. Now take that and put that in your stomach. And the only thing you're aware of is your stomach being comfortable, you feeling light and energetic, and that was exactly what you felt like you needed. Notice how that seems appealing. Okay, so now there's an important difference. Anything that you imagine, now when you imagine something in your mouth, it activates the part of your brain responsible for compulsion and repulsion. So it's a stronger feeling. Anything that you imagine in your mouth is a stronger feeling than anything you imagine in your stomach. So somebody might say, oh, well, yes, the healthy meal did feel pretty good in my stomach, and that was good, but it's not that compulsiveness of imagining something in your mouth, like a cinnamon bun in your mouth. And that's 100% true. I agree with that 100%. So since I don't want to be controlled by compulsion, I'm going to choose to imagine things in my stomach. So there's two important points about imagining something in your stomach versus imagining it in your mouth. Your mouth is pushy and wrong a lot of times. Your stomach is always right, and it's a gentle advisor. You still have the choice, but it will give you good advice on what to eat. So given those two things, it's extremely beneficial to choose to have your stomach be your advisor. And the way you do that is by getting into the habit of imagining what the food looks like you always do, and then skipping over your mouth and going right to your stomach, imagining what does that feel like in my stomach. And your stomach will give you good advice based on that. And then, of course, it gets to the how question, and that's where hypnosis comes in. Hypnosis amplifies that process, makes it much easier. You can still do it theoretically with a lot of practice and determination. You can work on that and do that. Hypnosis just makes it much more efficient, makes that process more efficient. That's essentially what hypnosis does. It's very good at automating thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, in case anyone was wondering how hypnosis fits into this process. Hypnosis itself doesn't do anything. It just amplifies other processes. So if you've got a good process, like the one we're talking about, hypnosis will amplify it and make it more efficient and easier for you to accept. Okay, so that's the second step. So first step, you think about food. Am I actually hungry? Second step, okay, I am hungry. What do I want to eat? Imagine it in your stomach. Notice what would feel good. Notice how, let me go back to an idea I was saying before. Every other diet's based on either restricting yourself from doing something you want to do or forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do. This method, the entire method, is based on making yourself feel good. Your only job is to make yourself feel optimally good after every meal, and the only way you can do that is by paying attention to how you feel. That is your only requirement. Care about your own needs, pay attention to how you feel, and meet those needs to the best of your ability. Feel good to the best of your ability. That is the only thing, that is your only responsibility with this method. And amazingly, it works far better than anything else. Especially since other things don't work very well, especially in the long term. Okay, so third step. First step was, okay, am I physically hungry? Second step was, okay, what would my choices feel like in my stomach, and selecting a choice based on what would make you feel good. Okay, so you've selected the food, you have the food. So now most people eat about 2 to 3 times the amount they need even to feel satisfied. And the reason for that is that they eat on autopilot. They don't pay attention to how they feel. That is the common theme of people who have a hard time losing weight. They don't pay attention to how they feel. You deserve to feel optimally good after every meal. And the way you're going to do that is by paying attention. You have to pay attention to how you feel. So I have a system that I've developed that I have been using for almost 2 decades, that I've used with over 6,000 people, and I think you will like it. And it's a simple 3-step process. The first step is, you've already selected your food. Before you start eating, rate your hunger on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 is not hungry at all, 10 is completely starving. Now, you should generally not be at 10. Don't wait that long. You should eat when you're hungry. Part of the reason for that is that if you don't eat when you're hungry, your metabolism slows down. Your body says, oh, he or she must not be able to find food, so I better slow down the burning of the calories that we already have. We better conserve calories. So you should eat soon after you're hungry. So you shouldn't be at a 10. Also, you're not going to be at a 0 because you wouldn't have gotten this far, because the first step was, am I physically hungry? So you're generally going to be like between a 3 and a 7 or something like that by the time you get to this step. So step 1, rate your hunger on a scale of 0 to 10. Step 2, take a bite of food and then pause and think about it. Notice how that bite of food affected how you feel. And once you've done this a couple times, it only takes a second or two to do that. Just notice how that made you feel. Did it move you from a 7 to a 6? Re-rate after each bite. That's step 2. Re-rate after each bite. So, I'm at a 7. Take a bite. Stop and think about it. Okay, what did that actually do to my hunger? It moved me from a 7 to a 6, or whatever. And continue doing that until you reach 0. 0 is where you feel optimally good. Step 3 is the most intangible, but just as important as the other 2 steps. Step 3 is, once you reach 0, notice mentally that if you were to continue eating, you would start to feel worse. You're hungry, and so you eat and you feel better and better and better. You get to the point where you feel satisfied. If you were to continue eating, you would start to feel stuffed. And you don't want to do that. You deserve to feel optimally good, not just pretty good. So once you get to 0, which is optimally good, notice that if you were to continue eating, you would start feeling worse. And you deserve to not have that be the case. You deserve to get to optimal and stop right there. And that's what you do. No longer do you have to worry about cleaning your plate. You are relieved of that responsibility from now on. You no longer have to clean your plate. You can put it away, you can throw it away. Notice that here's kind of an important thing. If you were to, so let's say you do keep eating. The problem is after, your body can only turn so much of that into energy. Any amount after that, it has to turn into fat. It's an oversimplified version, but basically, once your body has enough food to turn into energy, the rest of it gets stored as fat, which means you're still wasting it. You're still wasting the food, and also you're putting fat on your body. So you can either throw it away, and then you're just wasting it once, or you're just wasting it, or you can eat it, and you're wasting it, and also putting fat on your body. So if you don't put it away and eat it later, you're still wasting it. Now, I'm not one to tell you not to throw the food away, but of course, most people would say the best option is to put it away. But if you continue eating it, it's still going to get wasted, and it's going to put fat on your body. Okay, so those are the 3 aspects of weight loss related to food. Just to simplify, the first step is, when you think about eating, ask yourself if you feel physically hungry. If not, take care of the actual need that you have, whether it's stress or boredom. If you decide you are hungry, then think about the food in terms of how it'll make you feel. You deserve to feel optimally good. That is your focus. And then 3, once you've selected the food, when you sit down to eat, follow the 3-step process, which is number 1, rating your hunger, number 2, rating after each bite, and number 3, noticing that once you reach 0, if you were to continue eating, you would start feeling worse. If you do those 3 steps, you will find that you easily eat far fewer calories, you have much more energy, you feel better all the time, and you lose weight naturally. So I mentioned there are 4 aspects to weight loss. The 4th is exercise. We are not going to cover that in this video, however I will cover it in a future video. There are a number of interesting aspects to exercise, just as there are for food. But for now, I just want to focus on the food aspect. And by the way, I really think that food is probably 2/3 of, or more, 2/3 or more of weight loss. It's not 50-50 between food and exercise. Exercise is primarily for cardiovascular health. It does help weight loss to a certain extent, but not as much as getting your food intake correct. All right, and that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope everyone enjoyed this and learned something, and I will be back soon for our next hypnosis chat. Thanks a lot.